Okay, so thanks so much for everybody coming and for having me. My name is Tom Shanahan, and I wrote a book called Ray of Light, as Ken mentioned. And from that book, it's about how Michigan State led college football integration. And from that book, I learned, for my second book, going to be coming out soon, a lot of the Michigan State assistant coaches followed Duffy Daughtry's model of expanding opportunities for black athletes and desegregating at a couple of southern schools. And one of them is Earle Edwards. So we're here to talk about the legacy of Earle Edwards, about how he revived the program in the 1950s, then desegregated in the 1960s. And so I have a chapter in my upcoming book about NC State, and I wasn't about to write about NC State without talking to Tim Peelan, an expert on NC State history, and we met at Amadeo's in the Earle Edwards booth, and he gave me lots of help. Tim, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello everybody, thanks for having me here today. I've spoken to this group a time or two before and always enjoy my time here. The opportunity to talk about NC State's leadership in a lot of ways in the integration of college athletics in this area is always something I would jump to. A few people remember that NC State, when it admitted its first black students in the fall of 1956, went on immediately and became the first ACC school to have black athletes compete for the school. The first two were Manuel Crockett and Erwin Holmes, who participated in a track meet at Dorton Arena in 1957. Erwin Holmes went on to become a tennis player at NC State, first varsity athlete at an ACC school, and the first black captain of a varsity team at an ACC school. So NC State led that, but it trailed and lagged a little bit in how it integrated football and basketball. And luckily we have one of the people who did blaze that trail here with us today.
Yeah, and then Charley Young and Willie Burden were Earle Edwards' first two black scholarship football players, and they were teammates at Enloe High when they recruited. And Willie has passed on, but Charley is our walking history here. Charley, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I was trying to, as I was driving over, trying to remember what I want to remember those days, and sad I couldn't remember everything I wanted to, but those were some good times. Back then, I remember, playing football with the basketball team back in, the early 70s, 72, 73, 74. So there was a lot going on, and it was very pleasant, not pleasant, but it was a great part of my life. But as far as going to state, I think it started, as Tom kind of reminded me, because you don't dwell on those things, you don't think about it until someone reminds you of, how it got started as an athlete at Enloe. I was, just a little background, I was a pretty big kid. I was still about 6'1", 200-poundish, and as doctors would tell me, growing up, and I started out small, real small as a young kid, but then I grew, started growing, and I had a condition where I was growing in some of the joints, like in my ankle and my back. They weren't growing as fast as I was. So I had some issues on the football field and some injuries. I mean, I could be running down the field and just cringe from back pain. Something was going on. So this led to me, we didn't know exactly what was going on. So, we had, of course, trainers at Enloe, but then and I don't know how it happened, but, we got in, or they got in contact with the trainers at NC State. And I remember specifically, Chester Grant, and I'm not sure if Herman Bunch was the head trainer there. I think he was, but again, I just don't remember. Yeah, so, and I could go over there and get some treatment, they would treat me, and through them and doctors, that's what they determined that's what was going on, in my body. So that was kind of my start becoming familiar with NC State. and perhaps NC State becoming familiar with me. And as I remember it, you know, so these were, I think I was a sophomore, so, you know, I was still young and rising, but, you know, I think they saw me as, a couple other schools saw me as, you know, I had potential. You know, I was a big kid, I was pretty fast, and so, you know, it's like, you know, I had a couple of letters as a sophomore, you know, just an interest, and one of those was in track. So I was, like I said, I was pretty fast. So I think that was the start of the interest of NC State in myself. So as that developed in the years, then I think State saw this guy named Willie Burton, and my teammate, and good friend, very good friend. We spent a lot of time together. But Willie was a very talented athlete. I think more consistent on the field than I was. You know, like I said, you know, I was big and fast, but you know, a lot of times that'll kind of get you in the door, but you know, you got to perform. But make a long story short, Willie was very consistent and kind of turned out to be, you know, more productive than I was. And still, I was still going through some injuries, you know, throughout my high school career, but you know, Willie flourished. But so as we became seniors and played together, and, you know, had success together, you know, we were fortunate enough to, you know, have Coach Edwards talk to us and recruited us. And so we went to state together. We didn't plan it, but that's how it happened. So it was, you know, a very exciting time in our lives, and kind of led to, excuse me, I've got a condition here which I think I've got a runny nose. I've had it for 3-4 years. And I think it's an allergy that we're kind of figuring out now that that's what it is from some medications. And I just, you know, I didn't know what it was. You know, now I'm on CPAP. I was blaming it on CPAP and all kind of things. You know, hey, I guess you guys know this is getting old thing for me. This is something else. I don't know about this. Glad for every day. But anyway, like I was saying, that you know, that was great times for Willie and myself. And you know, Willie went on to have a great career. You know, at NC State. I think got drafted by Detroit Lions, and didn't stay on there, but then went to Canada and just exploded. Had a great career in Canada, and I was fortunate enough to be drafted by the Cowboys. So that's kind of how I got started. So my days at NC State, oh man, that was the best. That was the best ever in my life.
Just a little bit of background, the person that Charley referred to here, Chester Grant, for the longest time was NC State's only black employee of the athletics department. He was a trainer. He was always the assistant trainer because he couldn't get the job as the head trainer because he was black. It was a segregated school, but he was for the longest time the locker room philosopher, the barber, the guy who taped everybody's ankles, all that. And he was elected to the National Trainers Hall of Fame, the second black trainer ever elected there. And there's a scholarship in his name at NC State. He was a player that he was a person that all players who came through there at that time remember very well.
Yeah, and then we wanted to honor Earle Edwards' legacy both for reviving the program and in the 50s, and then of course desegregating in the 60s. And I'll let Tim gave me all this background, talk about how bad the program was when Earle got here in '54 and the dilapidated stadium. And Tim some of you remember it, and Tim can talk about that.
So when Earle got here, NC State played at Riddick Stadium, and Paul, you'll remember and can tell folks what that place was like. It was about 20,000 seats. It had an outdoor press box. It had lights, but not good lights. It was crowned. Burt Reynolds told me one time he almost drowned in a game on the field at Riddick Stadium because there was so much water. The hurricane was coming through town, and he and Lee Corso ended up on the bottom of a pile, and both of them were taking on water pretty heavily when they were down there. But it was dilapidated. Earle knew he couldn't succeed with that stadium, so as was the case a lot of times during that era, Earle took his team on the road. He went to Louisiana Southern, as it was called then. He would take his team to Wyoming, to Arizona State, to UCLA. He played most of his games on the road. NC State only played about 3 games at home during that era. And sometimes their first home game was not until right around Halloween. So they would have the entire fall that they would play on the road, so he could get some money. He knew they needed a new stadium. He didn't win an ACC game his first 3 years, and then when he did win an ACC game, they went on and won the ACC championship in 1957. He won 5 ACC championships during his years there: 1957, 1963, 64, 65, and 1968. And then you guys came along under Coach Holtz and won in 1973. So when Earle came here, it was just before that time, NC State talked about dropping football completely, not having it. And then the Southern Conference schools decided to break away and form the ACC, and NC State knew it could not compete and would not be invited to join the ACC if it didn't have a football program. So NC State put all of its money into basketball, became the biggest power in basketball in this area, with folks like Lou Basillo, and came back, and the basketball helped fund the football. One of my favorite stories is that Roman Gabriel told me when he came to visit NC State to play football, he also wanted to play basketball and baseball. Coach Edwards never took him to Riddick Stadium. He never saw it. They took him to see the Dixie Classic at Reynolds Coliseum, which was the biggest and best and most elaborate basketball arena between New Jersey and Louisiana. And Roman said, well, if their basketball stadium's this good, I can only imagine how good their football stadium is. So he came here sight unseen, became an All-American and first-round draft pick in football. Only played basketball a little bit, but did lead NC State in home runs and RBIs in baseball his junior year. So Earle changed everything, and as Bob Kennel reminded me, Earle's first recruiting class came from 3 places. A third of the team came from North Carolina, a third of the team came from Western Pennsylvania, and a third of the team came from Eastern Pennsylvania. That was his recruiting base. And those guys came down and won that championship in 1957. And that's what got everything started. It turned everything around. Now, right about that time is when NC State integrated its classes and its sports. But because Coach Case had some very good success in basketball, he also had some very curious people from places like Kentucky and the NCAA who were interested in how he became so successful. That led to a couple of probations, led to some ill will between Coach Case maybe and the leadership of the university, and the university was not really set to integrate its major athletics or major sports at that time. It waited until later when the other schools in the ACC in the late 1960s began to integrate its teams. So there's some reasons why NC State was the first to integrate, and there were some reasons why it was at the end of integration for basketball and football.
Yeah, and the story of college football integration is a real complicated one, and it's a long track over the 1960s. A lot of people, you might have heard the stories about Bear Bryant in the 1970 USC-Alabama game. That's all baloney. It's made up by USC people and Alabama people for USC people to protect their legacy that they followed an unwritten quota. They only wanted a half dozen black players in the 60s. Out there, 62 national championship team only had 5. Their 67 national championship, we only had 7. One of them was O.J. Simpson. and he was from San Francisco Community College. And if you think about it, Los Angeles, the population and diversity, and you only have a half dozen black players, you got to work at that. So Duffy Daughtry's teams at Michigan State smashed these quotas. And the Spartans were the first fully integrated team. And they came down to North Carolina in 1964 and played when North Carolina was still segregated. And then they had their big teams in 65 and 66 that won national titles. Jimmy Ray of Fayetteville was the quarterback. And they played the game of the century against Notre Dame. 33 million people watched. That was a record TV audience for back in those days. And they saw the contrast. They saw the future. Michigan State had 20 black players, 11 black starters, 2 black team captains, College Football Hall of Famers George Webster and Clinton Jones. And then Jimmy Ray of Fayetteville, E.E. Smith was the first black quarterback from the South to win the national title. Notre Dame had 1 black player, Alan Page. So USC and Notre Dame were the past, Michigan State was the future. In spring football in 1967 here at NC State, a guy named Marcus Martin, who was in the band, he had actually been on the field at Carter Finley Stadium, in the band in the fall of '66. And he came out for the football team as a walk-on in the spring of '67. And it's notable that Earle kept him on the team. He was good enough to keep him on the team because that same spring in 1967 at Alabama, there were 5 black players who came out for spring football. And back in those days, Bryant was being questioned for his all-white teams. So if he wanted to make a statement, here was an opportunity. He cut all 5. So Earle was ahead of most schools. In fact, Maryland was the first ACC school to have a black player, Darrell. They recruited him in '62 as a Navy transfer. Wake Forest was the second with 3 black high school recruits from North Carolina high schools in '64. And then we have, North Carolina State was third with Marcus Martin. Clyde Chesney came along, similar to Marcus, was a walk-on. He was from E.E. Smith in Fayetteville, and he had been inspired by Jimmy Ray's success. And Clyde came out for the team, made it. By 1970, he was a starter. He was the first black starter for Earle Edwards. And by 1971, he was the first black NC State football player to earn postseason honors on the all-academic team. And the important thing about Clyde Chesney, Marcus Martin's career didn't work out. Tim could talk about more about that later. But the important part about Clyde Chesney is when Earle offered Willie Burton and Charley Young scholarships. Remember, it's a predominantly white campus. That's a pretty lonely experience for an African American. And Charley, you told me about this, about how Clyde was a mentor to you guys and really helped you adjust to the college lifestyle.
Once I met Clyde, he was a very nice guy. I just thought he was a gentleman, off the field, and just, great. And he talked to us, about our situation, on campus. Nothing very deep, but just, how to just go along, don't cause any problems, and let that, let your performance on the field kind of, lead you. So, he inspired us in that respect. But, like Tom was saying, on campus in 1970, it was kind of a lonely experience. You felt like the only friends you really had were your teammates. And that was probably kind of true too. But still, you think about the time, and I remember, going home, 15 minutes, 20 minutes from campus, on the east side of Raleigh. I went home every weekend. You would have thought I was, I don't know, but if I couldn't go home, getting on the bus with my 15, I think it was about 15, 20 cents. This was every weekend. As soon as Friday hit, classes were over. If I didn't have, anything related on the football team, man, I was at home because it was just, I just didn't, socially, it was just nothing there going on. So I'm at home, and slowly, well, not slowly, actually, as I think about it, sophomore year was a little bit better. Junior year was a lot better than senior year. Oh man, that was the best time in my life. I was enjoying life really, on campus.
To tell you about his senior year, NC State won its first 2 games. Lou Holtz, in his second year, took his team from Raleigh and went to play at Nebraska and Georgia. Lost those 2 games while Billy Graham was doing a revival at Carter Finley Stadium for 8 consecutive nights. They came back, won every game after that, and won the ACC championship. That began a run for NC State that was the 73 football championship, the 74 men's basketball ACC championship and national championship, and the 74 ACC baseball championship. So it was a golden age of NC State. One other point I'd just like to make, Marcus Martin, Clyde Chesney, Willie Burden, and Charley Young. Marcus Martin went on to become a medical doctor and then became the chief diversity officer for the University of Virginia system. A very important role that he had there. Clyde Chesney not only earned a graduate degree from NC State, he got his PhD at Michigan State. Willie Burden not only got his undergraduate degree at NC State, but also became a PhD and an athletics director at a Division I scholarship. And Charley Young, sitting here beside me, was a first-round draft pick of the Dallas Cowboys. NC State created opportunities. These guys created success that both was beneficial to both, I believe. And the integration of college athletics was important culturally to the city of Raleigh, to the state of North Carolina, and to college athletics in general.
Yeah, and then Charley hurt his knee, or he would have had a longer NFL career with the Cowboys. He's a first-round draft pick. But then Charley came back home and he worked for the sheriff department in the working with juveniles for 28 years. So think about all 4 of these guys being successes as pioneers. What if they'd failed? What if they'd had problems on campus? How much harder does that make it for the school to invite more black athletes to come to campus? And I was thinking about that. If you were here last week, you heard Ernie Myers speak. Ernie did a great job talking about the NC State basketball team and their national championship. And he came here in 1983. That's only 13 years after Charley and Willie Burton. So that's how fast things progressed when you had the right people in place. The other thing I wanted Charley to talk about, Charley had mentioned he didn't really, at a lot of the other schools, Darrell Hill, when he was at Maryland, when he went down to Clemson and South Carolina, he was abused. The opponents made cheap shots at him on the field. The fans were abusive. When Darrell Hill's mom went to watch him play at Clemson, they wouldn't let his mom in the stadium. And then Jerry Levias was the first black player in the Southwest Conference at SMU. And when they played at Texas, the fans were holding up nooses. And when he played at TCU, the FBI had deemed a death threat so credible that he was escorted by FBI agents into the locker room and out of the locker room. So that's how bad things were, and that's how fast things have come along. And I was telling Charley about this. And Charley said, if you saw some things on the Freedom Wall, I guess, and maybe in the French class you were in, you think they got a little more advanced French speakers had a few comments for you. But all in all, it was a good experience for you. You encountered more racism in Texas than here in North Carolina. Is that right, Charley?
Yeah, that's true. On the state's campus, I mean, personally, I didn't experience anything as far as treatment and from other folks racially. Me personally, the incident in French class, I don't know if that was racial or just I didn't know French as well as the other schools in the class. You could go either way, but what happened was in that class we had the assignment was everything was pretty much in French. So you go to class and you had to read in the textbook, in French, and I just didn't do as well. And I recall after one attempt in class, and I had a tutor in French, throughout my last 2 years in French, and so she helped me. I could translate in the book. I had notes written in the book, everything, but you know, he had to read it, pronounce it properly, and I didn't do that great. And I just remember the professor, after I, you know, tried my very best, you know, to read my assignment, what she, you know, gave me to do, a few paragraphs, probably. And then she made a comment to the class in French, you know, and everybody else was laughing. I'm sitting there like, you know, so I really didn't know how to take that. That's why I said, I don't know if that was racial or just I didn't do well in French. But other than that, you know, as far as anything else, you know, I may have had some issues with a particular person or something that I recall. Only had one incident that I recall in the dorm or something. And this, you know, he was on the football team and he said something to one of the black female students. And I responded, you know, and got in his face. But other than those two incidents, I don't remember anything other than saying that you're seeing, you know, certain folks scribbling on what's the tunnel, in the tunnel?
The free expression tunnel.
Yeah, well, you could write anything there. Other than that, I don't recall anything at NC State. You know, the worst part of me was, again, the loneliness in my social situation early on. It was just, you know, that felt terrible. But as far as anything else racially, you know, it just wasn't there, at least as far as I saw at NC State. And like we were saying, you know, I did find Texas a little more, I mean, it was out there then. Being a Dallas Cowboy, you kind of shielded from some of that because you were a Cowboy. But what happened was, my first year, I had an ankle injury, and I was going to have surgery. One of the team's doctor, he had his own facility, you know, out in Texas somewhere. So we had to drive there an hour and a half, 2 hours away. And it was two of us, the center, starting center, was going to have surgery, knee surgery, and I was going to have ankle surgery, you know, once off season we got there. And so he and I were going to just drive to the facility, you know, and have our folks come get us, you know, once the surgery was over with. So on the way out there to the hospital, and he was driving, and we stopped to get something to eat. Oh man, well, when they saw this black guy with this big, he was an offensive line center, you know, big, they was like, I mean, there was, you know, the comments weren't that bad, but they were directed toward us at what kind of couple were we? The big fat guy and this black guy, I said, oh great. You know, so that was my first experience really, you know, being, you know, targeted with, you know, at the time, I'm sure there were light comments, but it was still directed at us, so it was, we wouldn't hurry up and get out of there. But one of the things I do remember though, this wasn't me personally, but during the off season, Dallas Cowboys, we had players play basketball. And we would play against, you know, anybody. It was just, you know, we would play against, you know, high school, like the coaching staff, or it was just public relations things. And we traveled, we flew, I mean, we would play against, you know, and then we get, you know, a little paycheck. You know, we went to Mexico and we traveled all over the place. But I remember we were going to a game in somewhere in Texas, and we stopped to get something to eat, and they wouldn't let us in. They wouldn't let players in. Drew Pearson, they let Roger in, but they wouldn't let any of the black players in. So Roger and another guy, you know, got us something to drink.
Roger Staubach.
Yeah, and you know, that was like, you know, you didn't, they came back to the bus and told us, so you didn't, you know, experience it firsthand. They weren't looking in our face, but they would not let us in this restaurant to get anything to eat. But other than that, you know, Texas was a little different. Once you got outside, you know, Dallas, you know, and didn't have a Dallas Cowboy on you, you know, like I said, that shielded us probably from black players from a lot of stuff. But once you got out there in the community, I mean, you know, out there in the rural areas, boy, it's kind of tough in Texas, but we made it through it, fortunately.
Okay, well, we want to give you a chance to ask some questions, but a couple of real quick stories. Tim mentioned the success of the '73 team. You had the Stallions with Stan Fritz, Willie Burton, Charley, and Roland Hicks, and Hooks. And they're coached by Lou Holtz. And Charley was telling me that Holtz would get so mad he could throw that clipboard 50 yards down the field. And they might be 30 minutes into practice, and if Holtz didn't like the energy, he'd start the whole practice over. You know, those are all NCAA violations nowadays. But Charlie can tell you more if you have some questions you want to ask.
The one great thing is the Stallions, Charlie and Willie and Roland, carried the ball up and down the field all the time, and then Stan scored all the touchdowns.
That is so true. And we had this thing where, you know, we teased Stan about that. You know, we'd get it down into the 5-yard line. And, you know, maybe that's what Stan did. When he punched through that line and get a touchdown. Okay, here we go again. But, you know, that's the way it was. And, you know, the four of us, oh man, that was great too. You know, to have those four running back to share time like that. But even with sharing time, I was like, Willie he was shining the whole while. Yeah.
I would change sports on you a little bit, but 53 years ago yesterday, I had the first date with my wife, but NC State played South Carolina for the ACC championship. And I think South Carolina was 14-0, number 2 or 3 in the nation, and Frank McGuire was looking at the next national championship. But the game got into double overtime. And with 23 seconds left, Ed Leftwich, who was the first black basketball player recruited by Everett Case, stole the ball, went down, laid up, and that was the end of the game, pretty much. So.
The amazing thing about that 70 championship game that was played in Charlotte against Bobby Crimmins and all those guys from South Carolina, that game was played under a full solar eclipse. North Carolina was dark that day, and NC State won the ACC championship under a full solar eclipse.
Charlie, Mark Newman, I was a football manager at Duke for 4 years when you were playing, and I remember in practice, I think Tom Harp, Mike McGee, your name was brought up all the time. They were fearful of you. And I was just wondering, because I had a couple of friends who were black players on the Duke team, and I know sometimes, at least these days, the players from different schools get together socially. Did you guys do any of that from UNC or Duke or any of the other teams around here get together as a group, the black players, or not really?
You mean from other schools?
From other schools, just socially.
No, I only had one. I knew one player running back from UNC, Ike Oglesby. I don't know if you remember Ike. You know, we were great friends, but I knew him, and you know, we would talk. You know, every chance we got, whether we were meeting, you know, on the field, or I don't remember, you know, like socially we did. So socially, no, not so much. I don't know many other players, you know, other at any of the other schools. No.
You got to remember, back then it cost 30 cents to go to Durham and 40 cents to go to Chapel Hill, so it was a little bit tougher.
Jim, why don't you take a moment and tell them about your event that you got going on in conjunction with the ACC tournament?
So the ACC tournament's underway, event near and dear to my heart. I know many here. 50 years ago this week, NC State beat Maryland in the 1973 championship game to win that championship and finish the only one of 4 undefeated seasons in the history of ACC basketball. That's a team that should be remembered, but also 49 years ago in Greensboro, the greatest game ever played by 2 ACC teams between NC State and Maryland. NC State won 103 to 100 and won overtime. Members of those 2 teams are going to get together for the first time since that day, 49 years ago, to talk about that game, what they remember. It's going to be David Thompson, Tommy Burleson, Monty Towle, Lynn Elmore, Tom McMillan, and Mo Howard. There are 2 Mo's on those teams, and I always screw them up between Mo Rivers and Mo Howard. But they're going to be there on both Friday and Saturday in the building adjacent to the Greensboro Coliseum to talk about that game. their memories from it, and just answer questions from folks who are interested. All free to the public. So if you have an opportunity or you're planning to go to the tournament, stop by and listen to those guys, because that team and that season changed everything. Yes, sir.
Where can we buy a copy of your book?
You can come up to me afterwards and I'll share that specific information. I'm sure Tom can do the same thing with his upcoming book. I would love for anybody who's interested. They're available online and I can get you to the right place.
Great discussion, guys. Thank you. Charlie, I was not in high school yet, not age you, but when I saw you play at State, it was tremendous. Those were exciting years, watching you just crush people, and Willie also. Great teams, great times. Part of the question that you bring up Earle Edwards, because he's such a historic figure, if you will, for NC State athletics. What made him successful? What really what was it about him that went from no wins to a championship and then maintained it while playing on the road, had a horrible home facility, was able to talk people into giving money to do a stadium, and I would think he's probably part of the reason why we started a series with East Carolina. So if you would just talk about what made him successful.
You're talking about Coach Edwards?
Yes. Just his personality.
Yeah.
Maybe Tim could talk a little bit more about the early years.
Yeah, Tim would probably know a whole lot more about that. My contact with Coach Edwards he was involved in our recruitment, myself and Willie. So, he would personally, I didn't know how important or if it was important that was. I can't remember the other gentleman that was on the staff within the football office that, I don't know if they had I can't remember his name, if he was, his job was to do recruitment, but I just remember the two of them, Coach Edwards and this other gentleman, and that's, those are the two people we saw. I mean, these were the nicest, gentlemen, and, of course, Coach Edwards, back then I couldn't play on the varsity team, because freshmen weren't allowed to play. So I didn't have any contact in that regard. He was just a gentle, kind man, who was the head football coach. So that was kind of the only, relationship I had with him. Other than, I do recall, which I didn't care for that much, was when the freshman season was over, maybe two athletes were called back from to go and run on the practice squad for the varsity team. Guess who one of those guys was? So, I mean, in all respect, that was probably an honor, more so than, just extra good here.
Two things about Coach Edwards. First of all, he was the ultimate gentleman. He was a trained engineer from Penn State. He loved Pennsylvania. He loved Penn State. He went to Michigan State when some guy named Joe Paterno, I think it was named head football coach at Penn State instead of him. His direction changed, but one of the primary reasons Earle Edwards was successful was because one of his close and dear friends from his days at Penn State, Al Michaels, came with him to NC State. And Al Michaels was his defensive coordinator. He was the reason NC State's defense was always one of the best in the country. In 1957, they had 5 shutouts. 1967, when the White Shoes defense and my high school coach, Dennis Bird, played for that team. They won NC State's first bowl game. He had good players, he had good coaches, and he had a strong devotion to not only academics. I think only 5 of the 95 players, something, I have a number somewhere in my files, did not graduate from NC State. He had, and as I said, that many of them went on to get postgraduate degrees. Coach Edwards was very much devoted to making sure his players presented him the right way. Roman Gabriel told me that when they got there as freshmen, they had to take etiquette classes because they knew they were going to be going to eat in restaurants and places, and they needed to present themselves well. Bob Kennel told me he already knew how to eat, so he didn't have to take the etiquette classes. But he was very much devoted to those things. And NC State was devoted to him when Earle Edwards died in 1987. He was cremated and his ashes were spread on the field at Carter Finley Stadium because he was the reason that stadium was built. All those sacrifices he made. Sorry, Paul.
And this is a real quick little, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it was actually Rip Angle.
Rip Angle, that's right.
Yeah, Coach Edwards was passed over, as you said, for Rip Angle, and then Joe followed
Right.
him. And you touched on it, but one of the first things that I remember when we got to Raleigh was Coach Edwards started an academic support group, and I don't know if Colonel Mac McCullough was still heading it up back when you were there, Charlie, but
Major Mac.
Major Mac, yeah.
Major Mac.
Yep. And I think the academic support that Coach Edwards founded at NC State contributed a lot to the team's success, and as you indicated, the graduation rate.
Yeah, and here's a real quick story about what great guys Earle Edwards and Duffy Daughtry both were. In 1966, North Carolina State opened its season at Michigan State. Jimmy Ray from Fayetteville made his first career start. Spartans won 28-10. Jimmy Ray still has the game ball. But for spring football, before the 66 season, Earle came up to scout Michigan State's spring game, and Duffy had Earle talk to the Michigan State players afterward. That's how much sports has changed. Can you imagine two coaches doing that nowadays? So they're just great guys.
Thanks for this interesting discussion, Tom, Tim, and Charlie. Tom, you might want to mention, I don't think you mentioned your guests here from Enloe, if you want to just take a moment to do that before we finish.
Yeah, Coach Ryan Clark is the football coach at Enloe, and when they heard Charlie was going to be here, he brought two of his players.
Yes, sir, always.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having us.